This is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Highlander format. This is a format that I created a few years ago. I play casually. It's kind of to mirror the Magic the Gatherings EDH or Commander format. So the rules are pretty simple. So you have to play with a 100 card deck minimum. Also, there's no maximum deck size. You can play like 120, 110, 130 or something if you want to get real greedy. Now, one of the things that are forbidden, there's a forbidden list, but it's pretty simple. It's all extra deck cards and extra deck related cards. So if a card specifies something about the extra deck, you just can't use that one. I'm not going to go through and list every single one, but essentially, you can use your extra deck. It's kind of like how old Yu-Gi-Oh! Was. I mean, you had fusions, but no one really played them. So it's kind of resorting back to the old feel of Yu-Gi-Oh! And just like Magic's Commander, every card's limited to one. So, like Commander, you start with more life points. So you start with double life points, 16,000, which makes the games kind of go long. It's a little slower pace. You get like 15 turns in or something. And then, just to kind of help with consistency, every duelist, you get one free mulligan per duel. So most of the rules are about the same. The player that goes first, they don't draw. Some of these original cards, we're going to resort back to the original text. Otherwise, cards like Sinister are kind of unplayable. Witch and Singing should be a little bit better. So, to give that old school feel, we don't want DMOC getting cards back at the end phase. You should be able to Monster Reborn it and the Monster Reborn Disc Commander like you used to. So, yeah, all the cards that have erratas resort back to the original one. There's a few more cards on the list. I just didn't list them on the video because they're just a little less important. Alright, so I'm going to go over the staples and other cards that I would deem good, good enough to play. So I'm going to start with the core engine. So the core engine is like this dark, burning abyss kind of engine where you have a lot of access to Sangin. Because you have access to Sangin, then you have access to Witch of the Black Forest, which that can like lead to a bunch of different boss monsters. You have Mystic Tomato that can get those. And then with Sangin, you have Skarm that can get Tour Guide or Sangin. There's also a few other targets like Lilith and Curry Bandit that you can search. So you run this whole Burning Abyss engine of just Skarm and Graph with Phoenix Rhino. And then you also play Seer just to kind of get the extra search. And there's also this card called Terrifying Toddler. It's pretty good. It's like a flip effect with 2k defense that just says flip, send a fiend monster from your deck to the graveyard. And then also if it's sent to the graveyard from your deck or hand, you can just special summon it and have it set. So that's pretty crazy. So that's like a lot of ways you can access Sangin. You also have Mathematician, and then there's this Crawler guy that he's kind of like a flip effect Foolish Burial. He can send any monster to the graveyard when he's flipped. So he's pretty good. He's just a generic card you can play to kind of help your strategy. You also have Armageddon Knight and Dark Grepher, which are more ways to access the Skarm, which then in turn will get you to the Sangin. So all these cards kind of lead into the next and help you kind of progress your game. You also have cards like Fiend Grieving, which can send a Fiend and then shuffle back a card from your opponent's graveyard. Dark Sacrifice is a pretty interesting card. Negates a card that destroys a card on the field. It doesn't destroy, but it does negate it. But then you have to send a level 3 or lower dark monster from your deck to the grave. So you can send Skarm and Graph and stuff to access Sangin and negate like a Regeki or something. And then you also have Reinforced Army, which then can get Armageddon Knight. It's pretty good because you also play a hero engine. I usually play this small little hero engine in most decks. It consists of Stratos, which will add one hero, the Vision Hero guy, which sends a hero, and you have Shadow Mist, that when he's sent, you can add a hero. And then you have Disc Commander, he's like the main one. Because he doesn't have that errata, you can kind of abuse him and use him a lot. Because you play a lot of Reborn cards, which I'll show later. There's also like a lot of miscellaneous monsters that are pretty good. So Demok and Magician Souls is pretty interesting. We're working a lot of decks that, you know, have a few dead spell or traps or something, or if you just kind of want a turbo. But Demok would be your only target to special Magician Souls, unless you play like a, you know, some kind of spellbook deck or some other spellcasters. But it's still kind of good just with those two. I played it in my Monarch deck. So you also have Fairy Tale Luna and Fairy Tale Snow. Snow is probably one of the best monsters in this format. It lasts forever. And in the really grindy games, it can get pretty crazy. And then Luna just searches for it. And Luna's really good in this format because everything's limited to 1, so they can't negate Luna's effect. So you essentially can bounce Luna into any monster. It's kind of like a better Neospatian Grand Mole because you can quick effect it at any time. And plus, it's a Stratos for Snow, so it's already like a good card in its own. And then I usually play Shaddoll Dragon in most decks because it's a searchable way to destroy a back row. Because you play so many cards like Mathematician and Foolish and like the Crawler card. There's a lot of ways to access Shaddoll Dragon. Also, it's like a 1900 beat stick that can't be mirror forced or ringed or torrential because it could potentially hit a back row then. So it's not too bad. It also has a decent flip effect. I think it like bounces a card or a monster. I usually play Magician of Faith in most decks. There's so many good spell cards in this format that it's kind of worth it. The format's slow enough where you can kind of get away with it. So the 3 jars, I don't really play the 3 jars in every deck. Fiber jar is kind of good because it can throw your opponent off. Morphin jar is really good for like decks that just want to dump cards or get to their cards faster. You got Card Trooper, pretty good for graveyard based decks. Used to be a good just turn 1 normal summon, you mill 3, pass, and you know they kill it, you draw a card, you just kind of get through your deck and to your cards quicker. Planet Pathfinder is pretty good for field spells. It's a searchable way that you can get to any field spells, so if you want to build a deck based around a field spell, you just put Planet Pathfinder. It's better than Terraforming in a sense because you can search it with Witch and Sanguine. And since like half your deck just searches for Sanguine, it's like you always have Planet Pathfinder. So it's a good way to always have access to your spell cards. So we got Yada Garasu. I don't really play Yada in every deck. I mean, it's kind of a cheap way to win sometimes. But you also have to like get really lucky and pull it off. There's the Chaos Emperor Witch and Singing combo. That's kind of easy to do because Chaos Emperor is pretty easy to search. So I mean, it is pretty good. It's just a lot of cards sometimes for these decks. And then Sinister Serpent, it's pretty good for decks that have discard abilities. There's a really cool combo with this Continuous Trap card that I think is pretty good. I'll explain later. But it's kind of a mediocre card sometimes. It's not the best, but it is a free card back. So, I mean, if your deck has some kind of strategy with that, that's pretty good. Also really good with Tidal. So we got hand traps and the boss monsters. Now, most of the hand traps are pretty good. Ash Blossom's probably like the best hand trap. It's the only thing that can negate Painful Choice turn 1. DD Crow, Effect Veiler, both are really good in this format. Being able to stop normal summons and stop Disc Commander and other graveyard effects. Ghost Bell, a lot of Reborn cards in this format. It's pretty good. Ghost Ogre, I think Ghost Ogre is probably a little bit more mediocre. Still a pretty good card. It can, you know, it's still a hand trap at the end of the day. Infinite Permanence, it's obvious, it's really good. You can get off Lilith also. And then Gores and Trag, I mean, people don't really look at these guys as like hand traps, but they were kind of like the original hand traps in a way. And they're pretty good in this format since the format's so slow, and a lot of times you're just normal summoning like a Stratos type card or something that's kind of getting through and you're swinging for a little bit. So it's kind of good to get some bodies on the board early. And then with the boss monsters, so you got these 4 dark dragons that you can all search with Eclipse Wyvern. So Eclipse Wyvern is like a really good card in this format because there's so many ways you can banish it. You have Fairy Tale Snow, which is very accessible by milling it with like or with Mathematician and Foolish. So it's very accessible to play these. They're kind of splashable in a lot of decks too because of that. Because you play enough darks already. I mean, really, it's like your light count's probably the thing you would have to worry about the most. But yep, Dark Arm Dragon, Chaos Emperor, old text, so you know you can blow up the board and hand. Chaos Dragon Lebaneer, Reborn, pretty much anything, hit cards. Darkest Diablos, that card's really good with Lilith since Lilith is very accessible in this format because of Skarm. You can get to this boss monster very easily. Also, it's very splashable because you already are playing cards like Armageddon Knight and Dark Refer, maybe, that you can kind of put in your deck even if you're not playing Eclipse Wyvern, just because it's a hard card to deal with and you can bring it back a few times. And you also have Blackluster Soldier, still a pretty good card. It's a little mediocre compared to Orbital Highlander, which is like pretty much the basis of this format. I mean, I was playing it before this card existed, but ever since they made it, I'm like, he's the best boss monster in the format because he's always usable. You only have to have 5 monsters in your grave with different names. And then you just mill 3 to pop stuff, doesn't target, and then it's also a card trooper, so you know if you play any graveyard based strategy, it's just getting you to more stuff. You can mill monarch cards and zombie cards and you know your hero engine. Pankratops seems like a staple. I mean, it's the best side deck card in current Yu-Gi-Oh! Almost, just because it's like an MST. I mean, it's an Exile Force MST. This Abomination Unchained guy, he's pretty good. He's very easy to summon, and he's just like a 3k beater that you can, when he's summoned, you can discard a card to destroy a card on the field, or destroy a monster on the field. Then Masterpiece is really good for pretty much any deck that's like already playing field spells. You can kind of tech this little 3-card engine in your deck. Sometimes you draw the True King Return and it's dead. You could play like a spell card too, and maybe like another True Draco guy. It just really depends on your deck, but I have teched just these 3 in decks before, and it's still pretty good because you get two pops off Diagram, and you search both these cards and having it unaffected by traps and monsters, and he can blow up stuff because you play like a decent bit of other continuous traps. So now we're going to get more into like the spell cards here. So these are like what I would consider like monster hate cards, stuff that takes your opponent's monsters or destroys them. Brain Control, Change of Heart, Snatch Steal, pretty good. Sometimes I don't play Change of Heart or Brain Control. I'll just play Snatch Steal in my deck because I'm trying to like get my deck down closer to 100. That's kind of like one big problem in this format is you kind of want to just play everything, and then you realize your deck's like 120 cards, and you have to like, okay, let me cut some down or something. So then you got Dark Hole and Regeki. Definitely think those are staples because they can hit face downs, hit boss monsters, get them out of the way. Tribe Infected Virus is pretty good. I don't play it in every deck, but it is searchable with Witch, and I mean, it is still a pretty good card. Giant Trunade, pretty good card. You can combo a lot with this. Sometimes it's even better than Heavy or Harpies or something like that because it doesn't destroy, but it really just depends. I like it for more combo oriented stuff. You have Cold Wave. I don't play Cold Wave in a lot of decks, just because you want to play so many like spell and traps in a turn, and the format's a little less monster base. It could be good in some decks though, maybe in like Cosmos or something, something that's like can really put out some big monsters. Lightning Storm's probably a staple. It's better than Dark Hole, and it's better than Heavy Storm and stuff like that. So I mean, it does have some restrictions, but I think you still play it in every deck. Twin Twister, pretty good when you have graveyard base strategies. I mean, all these other cards are pretty self-explanatory. Mystical Space Typhoon, Heavy Storm, Harpies. Cosmic Cyclone's pretty good because it can banish. And then Heavy Storm Duster you play because not only does it hit 2, but it also is searchable with Lilith, which can be really good sometimes. So this is what I would consider the search and draw section. So you don't have to play all of these, but some of these are like notable that are pretty good. Painful Choice is pretty much a staple. I don't think there's a deck that you wouldn't play this card in. Foolish Burial's the same way. I mean, most decks have some kind of graveyard strategy. It's also a way to get to Sangan by sending Skarm and all that. So you definitely want to play Foolish in every deck. Last Will's the same thing, can summon any 1500 attack or less guy. Gold Sark, this one's like a little debatable. I mean, I probably would play it in most decks because you can search Painful Choice, which is like insane. You wait 2 turns, but like most of the time, like they have to have the negate. If they don't, they don't. Which there's not that many ways to negate Painful Choice. Ledger of Ledgerman, it's a pretty good one. It's like a wait 3 turn fucking Pot of Greed, but still pretty good. It's worth the wait for the advantage. I mean, you're gonna have like 15 turns in a game anyway, so. Left Arm Offering, I think this card's really good in decks that don't really care about the cards being banished. It's pretty good in like Dragon Rulers or like a Chaos deck or something like that. It's also really good if you play Dimension Fusion, because you can Left Arm Offering your hand away and then Dimension Fusion them all back. So it's pretty good in those types of decks. Sales Pitch is like an interesting one. It's a random new card they made. It's like when your opponent adds a card from their deck to the hand, you can play it, and then you can add a card from your deck to your hand, but I don't think you can like use it that turn. Dark Factory and More Production. This card is one of the best cards. It says once per turn you can send a monster from your field or your hand to the graveyard to draw a card. But it's once per turn, both players' turns, so you can do it on your turn and then your opponent's turn. So you can constantly be pitching monsters to kind of get through your deck. And it's really good comboing with like Skarm and Disc Commander and Shadow Mist, and there's just so many cards that you just want to get off the field. It's also a pretty cool card against like cards like Change of Heart and Snatch Steal. If they try to like destroy your cards, you can just send them to the graveyard anyway. Or if they try to kill your guy by battle, you can just send it to the graveyard. There's just like a bunch of ways to make this card amazing. So I definitely think this card's a staple. And you have Graceful Charity, obvious staple. Pot of Avarice, you don't have to put in every deck. Still think it's pretty good, being able to reuse stuff. It's really easy to get like the Skarm engine and all that stuff in the grave, so it's not hard to fuel. Pot of Duality is probably a staple. I mean, you can wait a turn to special summon in this format, so it's worth the wait. It's nice to have this selection too. Pot of Greed, obviously staple. Mirage of Nightmare. It's not really a staple, but it's probably like an insane card in like any graveyard-based strategy, because you can just dump cards for a few turns and then turn it off. Also, you can turn it off with Fairy Tale Snow, which is like insane. Card Safe Return, play in Dragon Rulers and like zombie decks. It's not really a staple, but if your deck specials from the graveyard a lot, it's definitely worth playing if you have the space. Supply Squad, definitely a staple. This card's kind of like the Dark Factor and More Production, but your opponent has a little bit more control over it. But it makes it kind of your opponent doesn't want to like destroy your cards because you'll draw cards. So sometimes you can like suicide stuff, so they can't really keep stuff in attack mode. So it's not like a stall card, but if sometimes they'll progress the game, you get to draw cards anyway. So And then Ancient Leaf, which is essentially a pot of greed in this format. Since you start with double life points, that means you're at higher than 9,000, so you can pay 2,000 to draw 2. Pretty much a staple. Kind of shitty when you draw a late game, but it's worth it when you draw it early game. It's like having 2 pot of greeds in your deck. So this is what makes Disc Commander really good. You might not need all of this stuff if you don't play Disc Commander, but I think at least Monster Reborn, Premature Burial, and Soul Charge are staples because they're spell cards, so they're faster. But with Disc Commander, you have a lot of different things. So you have Back to the Front, which summons a guy in defense mode. It's a normal trap, so it's searchable with Lilith. You have Call of the Haunted, Oasis of Dragon Soul, Powerful Rebirth, and Limit Reverse. These are all special monsters from the graveyard. Limit Reverse has a restriction. It has to be 1,000 attack or less, I believe. But that's still Disc Commander. And then also what's cool is if the monster switches to defense, it destroys itself. So if you limit reverse Disc Commander in your opponent's end phase, you draw 2, and then on your turn you switch to defense mode, it dies, and then you can play like another Reborn card in the same turn. So limit reverse is pretty cool if you just want to get greedy and have more. I don't really include it in every deck just because I already have so many Reborn cards already. And then you have cards that special summon from the banish. This is good for a lot of different strategies because cards are always getting banished. DDR wouldn't include in every deck. Same thing with Dimension Fusion. I would only include it in like decks with like Left Arm, and like a DD deck or something like that. Like a deck that has a lot of banished stuff, Chaos, Dragon Rulers, stuff like that. And then Return from the Different Dimension is really sweet because searchable with Lilith. So it's like an accessible way to kind of get to your banished cards. So these are all pretty much staples. I don't see why you wouldn't play them. They all rip cards, Confiscation, pay 1,000, send a card from your opponent's hand to the grave, Delinquent Duo, randomly hit one, then your opponent chooses one, Forceful Century, you choose a card from your opponent's hand and send it back. Call by the Grave is still pretty good in this format because at the end of the day, it's a DD Crow that's also can negate hand traps. You don't always draw a hand trap, so it's like sometimes you draw it and it's kind of dead. But it's still a pretty good card because it stopped Disc Commander and shit like that. Triple Tactic Talents, I mean, you don't really need this card, but I mean, it's a sweet card. You might as well play it if you have it, if you want to throw it in your deck and stuff. Probably steal opponent's monster, draw 2 or something like that. But it's not like the best card. It's not really needed. Boss monsters are definitely better than a spell card. Counter traps usually include these 4 Solemns in every deck. You want to be able to negate some summons. Boss monsters are pretty much the main thing in this format, so you want to be able to negate those when you need to. Solemn Judgment and Scolding both can negate any card, so they're a little bit better. I would definitely include those in before the other 2, but pretty much staples. And then you got Continuous Traps. So Imperial Order, you pretty much want to include in every deck because it stops every good spell card. Also, it's pre-errata, so you can turn off when you want. Royal Oppression, also one of the best cards. It's a better Vanity's Emptiness. It can negate Inherit Summons, so you can negate Dark Arm and Blackluster and Chaos Emperor and stuff like that. Ultimate Offering, I would only play this in more like combo decks. It is kind of a cool card, but you only see it every once in a while, and usually you see it like after the fact. So, and then we have the normal traps. So this is really important for Lilith because these cards are the most accessible traps in your deck. You will see these cards so often because of Lilith. Sometimes you get to like do Lilith twice, and so you're like guaranteed to get a certain type of effect. That's what's kind of cool. So you can like pick like Back to the Front or Return, and then also pick like Sixth Sense. It's like that's bad. Like if you have a card you want to summon that's banished or from the grave, it's bad for them, and then also Sixth Sense is bad for them potentially. You have a 1/3 chance and then another 1/3 chance. So These I would consider staple cards like Crush Card Virus. It's pre-text, pre-errata text. It's still pretty good. It's not as good against Cosmos though. Sometimes you can just help them out when you do that, but it just depends. Trap Death Shoot I would probably consider a staple. Being able to rip cards out of your opponent's hand is always good, and the information can be valuable. Ring of Destruction, definitely include in every deck. You definitely want to include at least like a few destruction cards, so that way you can choose like 3 cards that destroy. Sometimes you pick like Ring, Torrential, and Mirror Force with Lilith. Torrential Tribute, also an amazing card. I think it's better than Mirror Force just because you can kind of hit them when they're not expecting it. Evenly Match is kind of interesting in this format because it's like you forget about it sometimes. But being able to banish cards face down is very beneficial. It turns off a lot of things. The Transmigration Prophecy, this card's like a DD Crow, but you can use it on yourself, which is kind of interesting if you need to do that. But it returns 2 cards from the graveyard to the deck. So much graveyard strategy. It's kind of nice being able to like choose like that and Fiend Grieving and kind of increase your odds of having a graveyard interaction thing. 6 cents, pretty much a staple. I mean, it's kind of funny. Every once in a while it happens, but it's kind of like Painful Choice. You kind of have to just go with it. They draw 5, whatever. I've played so many games of this format where somebody resolves 6 cents or resolves Painful Choice and they still lose. Like, you could draw 5, but if my Cosmos are just better than your cards, like, you're going to lose. Or if I get my Monarchs going, or, if my strategy is just faster, or, I drew better, sometimes those 5 cards don't even matter. So, definitely don't just quit because your opponent plays Painful Choice or 6 cents. And then the 3 Mirror Forces, I think these are the 3 better ones if you're going to have to play Mirror Force. Drowning is probably the best one because it's good against Cosmos, where the other 2 aren't. Plus, Drowning is just good against like other cards, like you can send back like Witch or Sanguine and stuff and not worry about it, where you don't really want to Mirror Force the other ones. And then these traps at the below are the ones that were listed in other categories. You can also search for them, so like Metaverse, being able to search for field spells randomly, or just have some back row hate. But yeah, this is the format. I have a few different decks built right now. I have a Monarch deck built. I have a Cosmo deck built. I have a Counter Fairy deck built. I have a Ritual Fairy deck built, looks a little different. A Zombie deck built. I have True Draco built. I have a Dinosaur deck built that kind of has a splash of True Draco and True Kings, along with the Fire Kings. I have a Dark Magician deck built. That one's pretty fun to play because you get to just do all the Dark Magician stuff, and the format's so slow that you can kind of pull it all off. Let's see, I have Dragon Ruler built. And there's a lot of different strategies you can do. You can also combine different strategies and kind of get creative with it, because your deck's so big that, and there's like 50 to 60 cards that I would consider like must have staples, that you could argue some like not playing MST or something, but can you argue like not playing like Lightning Storm or like Harpy's Feather Duster, so you can kind of cut down on those cards and combine different strategies together. Or you could just play a lot of cards in your deck. You play There Can Only Be One, or not There Can Only Be One, The Grass is Greener strategy. Play 140 cards and just have like this big old graveyard deck or something. I don't know. I mean, there's so many different things you can do in this format, because the format's so slow paced, and then also being able to have access to Witch and Sanguine essentially at any time. Like every game Sanguine resolves. Like both players resolve Sanguine literally every game that I've played of this format. It's almost like impossible for something like that not to happen, or at least you get to Torghast or something, so there's always like a way to get to your cards. but yeah, and so I'm going to start making videos of highlights of like duels between two decks. So that way I can kind of showcase the different strategies and stuff, and kind of showcase what exactly like happens in a game, because some of the games can get pretty crazy and drawn out, and you know, somebody might be winning and then the other person top decks painful choice and kind of gets back in the game, but then the guy, you know, doesn't lose everything and he top decks masterpiece. And you know, there's just so many different things that can happen. It's really all about the boss monsters. But yeah, so check out this channel, subscribe to it. I'm gonna keep making more content, various different things. We're going to start doing box openings and product review. Maybe do some deck profiles here and there.